We should look at climate change from different perspectives. You can look at it from the alarmist perspective where everyone must panic because they're panicking and they're getting children to panic. But should we all panic because a few say we must panic? Or because some are panicking? In a war or a stampede of horses or any actions where it's a crisis or emergency? Should we all panic because there are some panicking? Should we not just stay calm, like the Chinese are doing? So the Chinese are the only people on Earth that I know. If climate change naturally, well, if say the added CO2 has been added to the atmosphere because of human activity, which is a continuing uh, thing because due to expanding economies all over the world, is inescapable. And only an ignorant and naive person imagines that the Arabs and all those people who produce oil for their wealth, the basis of their wealth, are going to suddenly stop producing that oil and sell it onto the market to suit a few children and young people and Swedish people in New York and Australia or England or wherever these activists protest. So you look at it from a Chinese perspective, you have to look at climate change from the perspective of each individual nation and their culture. They all have a cultural perspective which is unique to them. So look at the Chinese perspective. When I spent some time in China, a year to be exact, and I come away with a great deal of respect for the Chinese. There are some restrictions on certain behaviours, and I don't disagree with that because of my own personal philosophy. Says good moral culture, what works together and works hard, cooperates towards a goal, is going to get ahead, and those countries what are divided by because of climate change and all the other thing that goes with that are going to fail. It's as simple as that. And if your children don't get a proper education, like they're not in the West, certainly not in America anymore, they're going to become basically tools of the state or the politics. Now, the Chinese people might be tools of the politics, in a way, but they're not. They're all getting on with trying to be capitalists as much as they can. Each individual Chinese is trying to capitalise on the opportunities the Chinese government's given them, and the education, in particular the education they have, which makes them extremely technically minded, and they're competing like mad with each other. They're trying to achieve whatever it is to get wealthy, in fact. Now, what the Chinese are doing also in regard to climate change, they're taking a purely positive, pragmatic approach, a practical approach to what do you do with CO2. Now, to the Chinese, one thing you learn when you're in China, and it's quite astonishing, how scientifically minded they really are. Then you take into consideration all the great philosophers, and going back to Lao Tzu, who was basically an evolutionist before evolution ever came about as an idea, as a scientific idea, a technical idea. But what the Chinese have done, they've adapted a bit of Adam Smith in their philosophy. That's something interesting as well. They've tried to adapt that idea as well. So it's not a socialist anymore, it's sort of like a compassionate capitalist system, if you like, which is what Adam Smith sort of was. And what they're trying to do with CO2 is say, well, you can't avoid CO2 because it's totally practical minded. The Chinese are totally wonderfully practically minded. They love to solve problems simply and practically and overcome the odds and show how good they are at doing things, even from converting old bikes into electrical bikes and things like that. They're rather marvellous at it in the villages, how they do simple engineering when we can't even get in near that sort of simple basic village engineering, and we don't even do that. We're nowhere near as gifted, and there's millions of these people in China doing this. Extremely capable. They send people up to space now. Well, because of this amazing discussions amongst themselves, they may have some restrictions on what they can say about the government, stuff like that. When it comes to discussing things technically, and if you can discuss things, what do we do about CO2, and you're free to discuss what you can do about CO2, if you're totally free to discuss what you can do about climate change, then what you will do is act what the Chinese are doing, not like, say, the Greens and the left in Australia or America or UK, or certainly in Sweden, where they've gone quite insane. You would not, what they do, destroy your economy and destroy your life systems. Well, the Chinese aren't destroying their economy for climate change. They're taking advantage of everyone's weakness and selling them things they don't need, like solar panels and wind generators, and that keeps their furnaces going, which uses a lot of coal, generates a lot of heat, produces a lot of CO2. And what China's also doing is it's producing more and more coal-fired power stations as well as nuclear power stations, because it knows to replace its fossil fuel dependency, which when it runs out in some time, 30 years time or more, then if it does, they can then run their motor vehicles and all the transport systems from electric transport systems rather than oil-based transport systems, which will be the future of transport system. But Australia is doing the opposite, and America, the left would have America incapable of running its electric transport system. They want to get rid of fossil fuels, but by getting rid of fossil fuels and coal, you will not be able to run electric transport systems. So therefore, by getting rid of fossil fuels altogether, you will not be able to have electric vehicles either. So it's a bit of a sad affair, really, when you got people who would be presidents of America who don't even know the most basic fundamentals of running an economy, or what energy is all about, or what creates all these things that people generally take for granted. But what the Chinese are doing, though, which we should, and the Indians are doing it as well, so we take it out to both of them. Many years ago, we didn't get much publicity in the West because we might be ashamed that these people might be way, way ahead of us in how and the government's taking and the people are getting involved. In China, as we know, they're creating thousands of hectares or square kilometers of vegetation where there was once desert. We're doing it for several reasons. One, it's to cut down the dust, which then cuts out the particles out of the air, which then it cuts down the smog around Beijing and all that. That's one thing to do, because part of the smog, everyone thinks the smog's to do with traffic, and it's not. That is a misnomer, and it's because of the difference, the temperature inclines between the cold, dense air coming down from the mountains and the higher slopes, into the warm, moist air from the China Sea, and that combined, and that creates a sort of smog, and it combines with all the particles, and that makes it look more smoggy than it actually is. But the thing is, they're doing this, and it means that the Chinese are acting intelligently in a progressive sense, a progressively evolutionary sense towards their own survival, regardless what the rest of the world does. It's a common sense and biological thing to do. Say, well, we as a biological organism, we the Chinese, we're going to survive regardless of what any of the rest of the world is doing. And that is a sensible thing to take, to say that we're a global family. Well, we're a global family. Who's dominating right now, the Chinese or Australians or the English or the Americans? No, the Chinese are, because they're leading the way. So if the global family is going to go one way, it ought to go the way of the world leaders at the moment, which are the Chinese in every sense, because America's totally divided between the people on the right and what I call people now, the Democrats, who can't even deny, they're condoning, if you like, the promotion of cannibalism as a way to reduce CO2, because they're not even saying to people who are saying let's have cannibalism, eat babies, and they can't even say that, well, that's insane, that person should be locked up. So the whole movement, the environmental movement in the left, has suddenly revealed itself as a cause of great insanity amongst young people, especially in recent weeks and months, with a demonstration from young Swedish people, which is unfortunately for those people, it's not their fault. I'm not blaming the young Swedes, I'm blaming the people who've created this anxiety and this madness in their heads. So if we are going to say let's act on climate, yes, I totally agree. Let's act like China's acting on climate because it's leading the way. Climate action now means Chinese action on climate now. Climate action now is Chinese action on climate now. We'll coal-fired power stations so you can do away with your oil dependence, and that's how you reduce eventually your CO2, and continue your transport system. Because to get rid of your fossil fuels to run your cars and everything, then you have no cars whatsoever. If you get rid of your coal, you will not be able to make cars for start. You need all heat to process ores. You can't do that, can't generate that much heat with wind generators and solar panels. It's physically impossible. And you need oil to run your cars. But if you want to replace your oil, which is the biggest cause of CO2 in the world is the oil, you have to then consider that the Arabs and everyone else relying on that may not want that to be reduced at all because they're depending on that for their income. So this is the thing what the Dems and the left in the world deny. The truth about humanity. The bigger forces, the very powerful forces on earth, the Chinese and the Arabians, very powerful forces. But they're not going to be told by a bunch of white lefty greenies what to do with their lives. One's a Muslim, believes it's down to God, and Chinese believe it's down to them to survive. So they're not going to listen to a few infidels and lefties in the West how to run their life. They're going to get on with making money and making themselves rich and powerful, while the left brings the West, or tries to bring the left and West undone. And it's about time these would-be Nazis were exposed for what they are.